I don't know that it's the only solution. It's just the best one that's been presented. And my guess is that perhaps there may be others that may be advanced. The original framework that we have contemplated may be mutated, and it may grow and change and become something different than what we originally envisioned. But if we all focus upon the ultimate objective here and carry on constructive conversations without fear, I think that we have every expectation that we can proceed. These are very professional people in the offices of insurance commissioners around the United States of America who care deeply about what they do and I think perform an extraordinarily competent service to the people of this country. So we're not against regulation. We are for very robust regulation, but we want uniformity and the capacity to be able to compete on a level playing field around the country. And we want to be able to drive products to market that don't consume unnecessarily expenses of development and delay that come with seeking approval from 56 different regulators. It has been estimated by one nonprofit review authority in this country, although I'm certain it can probably be debated, that as much as $13 billion a year gets consumed in unnecessary duplicative regulation and approval processes in this country. Now, I don't know if it's precisely $13 billion. And I don't know the methodology, but it's frequently quoted, and I do believe that it's billions of dollars that end up impacting ultimately consumers because those costs are passed on to consumers. So from an international trade perspective, from a recognition that capital markets are sophisticating themselves and becoming intermingled with markets around the world, that products, different financial products that are provided by securities brokers and banks now bear a very familiar resemblance to insurance products, and recognizing that these are all commodities in international commerce, we believe on that basis too that we should proceed with being able to compete fairly around the entire planet. So because of this extraordinary growth that has occurred and the structural changes in recent decades, and then you add to it the changes in information technology, as well as attitudes toward competition and protection that exist around the world and in the United States of America, we think that the current U.S. regulatory system is just not equipped to supervise these new developing markets and opportunities for planetary commerce, and that in fact there ought to be an option, and I underscore again, this is an option. It's an option for agents and an option for insurers. And I'd like to make note of the fact that when you think about the landscape that all of you have dealt with over the course of your professional lifetimes, it's been fairly stable and I think cognizable to you and a matter of comfort that it appears to have the same hallmarks of operation year after year. But just envision for a moment how things can change as rapidly over the next 10 to 15 years as they have over the last 10 to 15 years. More and more commerce done electronically. I don't know about your sons and daughters, but mine do virtually everything over the internet, including the purchase of insurance products without an agent involved. And that, I think, is going to start occurring more and more and more. Not with me, because I'm not altogether certain I trust that process. I want my agent available to me. But what I would suggest to you is that unless we expand the market and we make the pie larger and we embrace change and we do so without fear, not without regulation, but with the same spirit that allowed for you to enter into business in the first place, my guess is, my belief is that your market is going to shrink more and more over the course of time. So you want to be expanding opportunities, not limiting them. And I would suggest that one of the best ways to do that is to be constructively involved looking for new opportunities. And by proceeding with something akin, at least as best as or better than, an optional federal charter that allows for us to export more products and drive more products to consumers in a more rapid fashion, you're going to see a playing field that becomes smaller and smaller over the course of time. And I don't think that's going to serve your profession, nor do I think it will serve our society necessarily in very constructive ways. OFC, as I mentioned, we believe ought to have a robust regulatory framework. It does not need, of course, as many office personnel as there are in 56 different regulatory agencies across the country. 13,000 or so employees is my understanding. It's not going to be so localized. It's not going to be artificially dealing with isolated markets. When you think about it, optional federal charter expands the marketplace. It allows for the spreading of risk over a larger area. It creates new opportunities for people. It creates perhaps new opportunities even to provide insurance in difficult areas, like the coastal areas where they have a very challenging time securing, for instance, disaster insurance in one fashion or another, and that could spread all across the country. So our view is, although we ought to be careful and we ought to listen to each other very thoughtfully, that we ought to proceed with a belief that we can make it better without compromising the integrity that has been maintained over these last 150 years and has largely been the result of very well-intentioned state-based efforts. But there's a lot of room in our judgment, particularly with the bill that's been proposed. You get a license in one state, and you're licensed in every state. If you're licensed in one state, you have the right to sell national products. Premium taxes still will continue to go to individual states. In addition to that, all of the state law that applies to litigation, state common law, all those rules that characterize an insurance contract as a contract of adhesion, therefore giving a presumption to consumers if there's a contention about whether or not a provision is clear or its coverage is plain and evident, ultimately get construed in favor of the consumer. So none of those things change. And as a consequence, we think that that limited option is something that will serve the people of this country, individual consumers, exceptionally well. There's a federal ombudsman that's contained within this national insurance legislation for the first time ever, focused upon advocacy of consumers' rights at the national level that focus upon insurance. There's a consumer protection services agency within that particular piece of legislation. And of course, there's an anti-fraud piece of the legislation that has very, very, we believe, perilous penalties for those who seek to violate the law. For the first time ever, those kinds of insurance frauds can end up being a federal crime and not just a violation of state law. So there's a lot of incentive for people to continue to conduct their business affairs in a way that has been assured by a state-based regulatory climate over the last numerous generations.